panel. I hope you've all had a wonderful day. And yeah, for the next 50 minutes, we'll be talking about research centering around asexuality and such, but we'll get into what our lovely panelists are doing in a minute. Just some admin before we start. The YouTube chat is to talk amongst yourselves. If you wish to ask a question, you can submit it to SliDo, as you probably know by now. And if you wish to report anything, then you can email acecon2020@gmail.com. But I think that's pretty much all I have to do in terms of administration. So I'll get on with introducing everyone. So first we have Derrick, who is a PhD candidate at Georgia State University, conducting research into A-spectrum representation in long 19th century British literature. And then we have Sasha, Kaye, who is an early career researcher currently based in London, but originally from Vancouver. Then Joseph DeLappe is a research associate in the Department of Wellbeing, Education and Language Studies at the Open University. And finally, Megan Carroll is an assistant professor of sociology at California State University. San Bernardino.
Yeah,
right.
That's right. It's nameless.
But yeah, I'll let each of these lovely people get into their research a bit more in depth in a moment. So let's probably start with Keith. If you want to introduce yourself.
I am a researcher at Georgia State University, and typically my focus is on British literature in the long 19th century. I attempt to go back and reclaim literature that is pre-existing as asexual in some way, shape, or form. Right now, my theory is focusing a lot on this Kantian notion of the purposeless purposiveness and applying that to sexuality. So say, for example, when the Romantics took that notion, they, whether consciously or inadvertently, they sort of created several characters that can be read as asexual because they applied this notion of the purposeless purposiveness, the amoral aesthetic appreciation that Kant is describing to sexuality. So Lord Byron's Lady Adeline, for example, she is described as having this sort of disinterested appeal in her husband, yet she is very passionate. She feels love. So it's not that same sort of robotic asexual character that we see stereotypically. It is a character that is fully fleshed out and multidimensional. And by reading these characters as asexual, not only do we create sort of a foundation from which we can now argue asexuality has existed in art for time immemorial, but it also helps us create a sort of a literary canon and adds new dimensions to the literature itself.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And then on to Megan.
Hi.
Oops.
Oh.
There we go. I tried you.
Okay, yeah. Great. So I'm Megan Carroll. I use she, her pronouns. As Daniel said, I'm an assistant professor of sociology at California State University, San Bernardino. That means I'm near Los Angeles, California. I am a sociologist, and I specialize in gender, families, sexuality, and social movements. So I'm building a new research project on asexuality, and it is a community engaged study, which means I value input from the community. I really value having a relationship between what the community needs, what the community wants to see, and what scholars are producing. So right now I have an advisory board that I'm currently still building. And that advisory board is helping me currently guide the direction of my study because we're in the design stage, and they'll be involved at every stage of the process. So if there are any community organizers out there who want to have a voice on my advisory board, I welcome you to please contact me because I'm still looking for people. Let's see. But right now, the paper I'm focusing on is about queer identities in the ACE community. So I'm using the Asexual Community Census 2018 to analyze who identifies along the asexual spectrum and also identifies as queer. So I can talk more about those results in that study if anyone's interested. But basically, I also want to mention that I really like working with quantitative data, and I think that ACE community census is such a treasure trove of information that people are not really using enough. So just as a public service, if anyone has research questions that can be answered quantitatively about stuff happening within the community, you can always tweet at me. Like, my handle is at MC Sociology. And I'm happy to just like spit out some numbers for you and tell you what the data says. That's a fun way that I like to use Twitter, especially during ACE Awareness Week. But yeah, that's enough about what I'm doing.
Perfect. Thanks very much. And then Sasha next.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Yeah, as Daniel pointed out, I'm an early career researcher, which is a fancy way of saying PhD candidate. And currently I'm doing my doctoral work in an unrelated discipline. I am involved in performance science, which looks at sort of the science and psychology of elite performance in various disciplines. But recently I had been working on a study related to asexuality and alcohol consumption that was recently published with Carroll and Bauer, who works on the ACE Community Survey, and Dr. Lori Brotto, whose name is all over asexuality publications. So without getting too bogged down in the details, essentially we were curious about the extent to which asexual individuals drink alcohol, and existing literature suggests that LGBTQ groups and various communities tend to drink more on average than what we might consider the general population. So people usually assumed to be heterosexual and cisgender. And Bauer hypothesized that ACEs would probably drink then like more than the general population and probably somewhere in the ballpark of LGBTQ groups. But that's not what we found. We actually found the opposite, where ACEs drink not only way less than LGBTQ groups, but way less than everybody else. So there's something happening that's statistically significant that suggests that ACEs are a lot less likely to drink than most people. And then we had to figure out why that was. So I'm happy to get into some of our interpretations of the data, and I'm happy to talk about our interview study that followed. But yeah, I'll definitely save that for the questions.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I think I noticed a similar thing when I was looking at the results from the ACE community census. So yeah, hopefully we can talk about it later. But finally, we have Joseph.
Hi, my name is Joseph DeLappe. I'm a qualitative sociologist who looks at not just asexuality, but broader issues of what we call sexual and gendered citizenship, which is the idea of private lives becoming public politics, and how that process happens. I completed my PhD last year entitled "Asexy and We Know It: Asexual Activism as a Sexual and Gendered Social Movement." So what I did was I interviewed, I think it was 19 activists who clearly identified themselves as activists, not just as asexuals, and for whom their activism was significant. And then what I did after I'd done that, because the engagement with Pride became part of what emerged from the data, then I spent 2 years running around North America and Europe, going to as many Pride events that I could go to, where there was a significant asexual activist presence. In particular, World Pride 2014 in Toronto, Berlin Pride, and Prides across London and Madrid. All over Europe. One of the things that came out of my work is a consideration, which I'm actually just in the process of getting my papers together to publish at the moment. And the paper I'm looking at the moment considers the tension between campaigning for A Pride and at the same time being part of a wider campaign for Pride, because the two groups, one of the things that came out quite interestingly was the two forms of activism don't fit easily within one umbrella, and there are often contradictions and dissonances between campaigning for pride, visibility and equality for asexuals, and campaigning for visibility and equality for LGBT umbrella groups. That's it.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will move us all into a level playing field now, because we can now get into a discussion based on the questions that you're sending us on SliDo. So yeah, if you do have any questions, don't post them in YouTube chat, post them on SliDo, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible. So first, have you dealt with any difficulties in terms of getting other people to take your research seriously, or difficulties getting published? And how do you deal with that? So anyone want to go first? Yeah, Sasha?
Oh, sorry. It's hard to think of you sometimes with the lag. Yeah, I certainly have dealt with some difficulties in terms of getting asexuality-based research published. In particular, with this study with asexuality and alcohol consumption, this paper went through 3 rounds of revisions, and the first, I mean, many of them were completely justified, and I totally agree that the changes we made were necessary. But there were definitely moments where we had to strike a very delicate balance between sort of accepting what reviewers were suggesting we change and when to sort of hold our ground and insist that, no, we're doing this a certain way because it's more true to the ACE experience. And because 2 of the researchers are part of the community, we were fortunate to have that kind of insight. In particular, when we were talking about gray sexuality in our paper, a few of the reviewers suggested we take it out because they said it was sort of too ambiguous. Like, we didn't have clear-cut definitions on what really is gray ACE and what are the boundaries. And we had to really fight them and say, well, that's precisely the point. It is sort of inclusive on purpose, just because a lot of the time, you know, I mean, sexuality is sort of amorphous in its own right, and we need that space to be able to explore identity. And eventually we kind of won that argument, but I mean, it's tricky. And I hope that in the future, these conversations will be fewer and more far between. But I think at the moment, because the area is still largely in its infancy, these are issues that most researchers, I think, will have to deal with at some point.
Yep. And Joseph, you had something to say?
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing problem. I have a paper under review at the moment, and it's with a really decent sociology journal, and it's really, really challenging because on one hand, I have to make my paper sociological. I have to cite the right people, which are not within asexual studies. I have to cite the right people so that I'm clearly signaling that this is a sociological paper, and at the same time, reviewers are saying to me, "Can you give us more 101 information?" And just things that, if I was talking to someone within the field or I was talking to community members, I wouldn't expect to have to constantly explain. So on one hand, I've got to try and put in all of this theory that tells people it's, you know, proper sociology, and then the other hand, they're asking me for like definitions of terms that I think I've defined quite succinctly within my use, because that's what I try and do, is I try and define as I go along. So there will be, you know, somewhere I'll say blah blah blah, which is often called aromanticism, and I'll do that, but that's not enough for them. They're like, why haven't you given us this list? And I'm kind of like, because I've only got 7,000 words. And I've got to try and get this all in. I think it's a real difficulty. One of the fields I work within is social movement theory. And I've actually got to the point where I don't actually, I'm not going to send any papers to them, because they basically turn around to me and say, well, is this real activism? It doesn't involve people who are being shot at. And I've had that kind of response. So sometimes you have to say, well, you know, there is a long history of LGBTQ activism, and this is how it works. And again, it's 101. You almost have to go. It's almost like rewriting the steps for people you imagine would understand it, but they have to be talked the whole way through. In your, not just in your paper, but in the review process, you have to say, well, actually, this is comparable to this. And it's time consuming, but I suspect it is because it's a new discipline.
I've gotten several peer reviews back, and one thing that, I mean, you generally have to have in all academic published paper is a sort of engaging with the scholarship that exists on that topic. But unfortunately, you know, there's not a wide berth of research on this stuff. So to engage with the scholarship means something very vague. when you're trying to engage with the literature and trying to find other areas where characters have been interpreted as asexual or aromantic or demisexual or gray asexual, and try and create this expansive summation of the scholarship. And if you don't have it, they just immediately discount your paper. And that's happened to me several times, where I've just gotten a short, like, you need to engage with the scholarship more on this, the existing scholarship. And I feel like shouting at the screen, like, the scholarship doesn't really exist like it does with other areas of research. And it's a little frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, Megan, go ahead.
Yeah, I will say that taking research seriously, my experience has been very polarized. I don't know if that's the right word, but on the one hand, my graduate school advisor, when I first told him I wanted to study asexuality, had this gut reaction of like, it's such a small population. Is that really important? Which is a very like quantitative trained sociology response that qualitative researchers deal with on a whole nother level anyway. But there's also people in American sexuality sociology who are thirsty for this research. Like the real experts of that subfield have really jumped on the opportunity to learn more about it. And so my publication opportunities so far have come from invited publications. Like Abby Goldberg invited me to write a chapter for her book on LGBTQ families and asexuality. And then Amy Stone, Delane Compton have invited me to write something for their book about liminal sexuality. So it's interesting because there's like a lot of enthusiasm on one hand, but then there's people who aren't really embedded in sexualities research don't get it right away. So my tip for researchers, because I've recently been through the job market and had to like sell my research really hardcore, my tip is to front load your theoretical implications before even mentioning asexuality. That's what I did on my cover letter. I said, I'm going to embark on a new study that covers sociology of medicine, gender, families, sexuality, masculinities. Like I listed everything through an exploration of asexuality, so that it really front-loaded the fact that like asexuality can help us theoretically understand all these very different dimensions of society. And I think once people, that helps it click for people who are initially dismissive of asexuality.
That was actually a perfect jumping off point into the next question, which was, are there specific journals seeking or interested in work on asexuality? Which I suppose you've already kind of answered a bit, Megan. If anyone else has anything.
I mean, the opportunities I got were specific, like books, not journals. Edited volumes are not as like prestigious as peer-reviewed journals. But my advice is to look for special issues. I haven't had, other people can speak to experience with specific journals. I plan to submit to Sexualities, just sort of where the kind of people I like publish. So I'm hoping they'll be receptive to it. I believe they've asked me to review work on asexualities before. But my advice was going to be to pay attention to special issues. I think Feminist Formations did a special issue on asexuality recently. Like special issues are great because they still look like any other publication on your CV, but there's a smaller like competition pool for a specific topic.
I think if I had any advice, it would be to look at sort of like the age of the journal. Some of these older journals that, at least in literature and all, they tend to be run by people who have a very sort of specific view of what they want for the journal, based on the tradition that journal has held for decades or even a century. So, it's sometimes a little more difficult to get, radical research that is sort of unique and new published in those journals without at least having a sort of grounding in other publications. So I would recommend, focusing, especially if you're a first-time publisher, focusing on journals that are, that started within the last 20, 30 years.
I would also, I'd also add to that. I think I actually think quite a lot of journals are really, really open to research on asexual studies. But I'd add a slight caveat, which is read the journal and make sure that you're writing what they want to see, and also make sure that they've not had it before. A bit like you, Megan, I tend to get asked a lot to peer review asexual articles. And I have rejected 3 papers for the same journal where they were using the same research cohort. They were basically asking the same research question. And all of them started by telling me that they were doing new work. And there had been a previous paper published 3 years previously. It's not even a long time ago. And I in each case, I rejected out of hand and simply sent them the name of the paper that had been published 3 years purpose. I think it was the Journal of Homosexuality, and they had clearly not done any homework on it. They had just assumed that there would have been nothing published in that journal on that topic, and I got them kind of like 3 in a row. I think because they got me the first one, they just sent me the next 2. But so I think it's really, really important. It's important. It's not to assume that any journal is negative. Certainly within the social sciences, I don't think that's hugely true. But what you have to be aware of is that you have to do a little bit of homework and make sure that you know what they've published previously and you know how you're adding to it.
Yeah, if I might just add one last little caveat there. It's also very much dependent on the disciplinary focus that frames your research, just because asexuality as a guiding lens can be applied to so many different areas of research. So, sociology is going to look very different from, a medically oriented paper, which is going to look very different from, a literary paper. And when you're dealing with these different disciplines, you also have to consider the assumptions and theoretical frameworks that we often sort of take for granted as the way people think about these things. So, if you're submitting to something like a medical journal, you really have to sort of consider the nature and history, for example, of like pathologizing asexuality and how your research maybe addresses that, which is sort of an ongoing issue. Or if you're looking at more of a social science thing, like you have to sort of see which questions are the most relevant in those disciplines, and that would probably help you get your topic published in the relevant discipline and the relevant journal.
Yeah, I was just going to jump off of both of your points, but especially what Joseph was saying about doing your homework. I think one of the biggest challenges of our field right now is that it's moving very fast, which is great. It's great to see that there's a lot of early career scholars doing new work on asexualities, but it does make it challenging to keep up with new publications. So I have a Google alert set up for like any new article that mentions asexuality. I get an email about it. I still need to organize those emails and download those articles. That's another challenge. But yeah, it's really important to make sure whatever you're doing is as up to date as possible.
Perfect. Anyone got anything else to add on that question before we move on? No? Cool. So talking about how the field is moving forward quite fast, is there any particular areas of research that you'd be interested in? Well, do you think are important to be pursued? Anyone in particular? Or I could pick on someone.
I could tell you where I think we failed within qualitative social sciences. I think qualitative social sciences has been not particularly good up till now about our research cohorts, who we recruit. And I think we have tended, and this is just within my subject, within sexuality and gender, within social movements, within all of that, we've tended to talk to white, cisgendered, young, educated women. And what we haven't done is we haven't made enough of an effort to talk to older asexuals, to asexuals of color, to there's been some good work actually in Britain on disability, but it's been kind of slantways. It started with disability and then the people moved into asexuality rather than the other way around. And I think we have certainly from Britain, I think one of the problems we've had is that, and I also think the great unexplored masculinity, which is more work on both on. I've yet to. I'm waiting for a paper on trans men, asexual trans men. I've never seen it. It seems to me like it's not my area, but it's like I'm waiting for that paper, and I'm just waiting for just more work on the disparities between research cohorts between women, trans women, cis women, trans women, cis men, and trans men, and that's kind of an area I'd really like to see some more work done.
Yeah, I was also going to say race, like number one, how asexuality and race interact. That's why we had Brittany Miles on a previous panel. She's studying like Black girlhood and asexuality and embodiments. I'm really excited about her work, but in the social sciences, there's just like very little research on asexuality and race. Aromanticism is also very neglected, which is something that I know the community as a whole is dealing with, but giving space for aromanticism and giving it its own attention rather than seeing it as a subset of asexuality. But I'll also say that as part of my community collaboration, I have a list of research questions that I created in collaboration with ACE Los Angeles, and we just sat down as a group and said, okay, what kind of research do we want to see? And that document is 2 pages typed single space. So there's so many areas to explore and uncover. And like I said, it's moving fast. So there's some areas I thought I was going to study, and then I met graduate students doing that work, and they're brilliant and they're doing great work. So I'm like, oh, okay, there's no reason to step on each other's toes because there's so much work left to do.
Sasha, Keith, anything to add?
I would just say that, the area that in literary studies that I've found the most sort of research where there is a sort of reclamation and study of asexual characters is generally British literature. I can't think of any article that I've come across of, African literature or South American literature. I would love to see an article like that that explores, the asexual implications in Borges, for example. But I haven't seen it yet. That's not to say that someone hasn't tried, but it's just that it's difficult to see those, and especially when you consider the fact that these different identities they intersect in really interesting ways. So whether it's an ethnic identity or a racial identity or a national identity or sexual identity or romantic identity, however these various identities interact, they create these interesting discourses. So the way I'm formulating my theory for long 19th century British literatures in identifying aspectrum characters, that's not going to hold true for Chinese literature. And I would just love to see a wide array of diversity in the research on this subject. I think that's where this will end up going eventually.
Yeah. Sasha, anything to?
More just a general comment that because there's not, I guess, the established body of literature in sort of asexuality studies, it is growing very quickly, but it's still very small. And as a result, there are so many questions we haven't answered and so many questions we haven't asked. And ultimately, I think any question that we can make some ground on would be a valuable contribution, regardless of discipline.
Cool. Thank you very much. Next question is, I guess, what are some main findings of recent research? You could talk about your own research if you want. We also have a question specifically about Sasha's research. Yeah. So if you want to focus on that, you can. But yeah, if there's anything you feel passionate about, want to talk about other than that, then feel free to go ahead. Anyone? I can pick on people.
I didn't know if Sasha wanted to jump in and talk about their findings.
I certainly can, sure. Basically, the really abridged version of this study is, as I mentioned previously, that there was a statistically significant trend that people who I shouldn't say people identified as asexual, and I'll get into that in a second as to why that is, but participants who were coded as asexual and participants who were coded as gray ace, they tended to drink a lot less than the general population and LGBTQ individuals. And essentially what we found was that aces were up to 70% less likely to drink or even to abstain entirely from drinking compared to anyone we could sort of group as allosexual in a binary logistic regression, if you were curious. But so there was that, but also gray aces tended to drink at a midway point between the asexual group and sort of the baseline general population, which intuitively makes a kind of sense if you think about gray asexuality kind of occupying this amorphous space between asexuality and allosexuality. But then you're like, okay, but why? Why though? I need to know why this is a thing. So we conducted some interviews after the fact to see if we could maybe get some insights into why. And there were so many themes that came out of it, but really just to highlight a couple of key ones. All of our participants, there were only 10 of them, qualitative. That's kind of the way how it goes sometimes. All of them reported a fundamental lack of interest in drinking in like various situations. So our participants who primarily were coded as social drinkers, so those who only drink or primarily drank in social situations, and those who abstained entirely. Social drinkers would often drink as a way to like fit in with their social group or like match the behavior of their group, or maybe cope with social anxiety to like an extent, or in some cases like sexual anxiety. Whereas our alcohol abstinent group just didn't care enough to drink, so they didn't. So that was interesting. And we still don't know why that's a thing, but that's another question we can answer maybe in another study. But the other main thing to come out of that, I swear I'll stop very soon. I just get really excited. I'm sorry. The other main thing that was really interesting was the relationship between alcohol and sexually coded behavior. And sort of just a content warning at the top of this, I might briefly mention things related to sort of sexual aggression or pressure or violence. So if that's not something you want to hear right now, maybe come back in 40 seconds. So essentially, alcohol and sexually coded behavior tend to go hand in hand. And for our participants, there was a lot of anxiety around that. So when I say sexually coded behavior, I mean something like if you go to a bar and someone buys you a drink, that's usually a gesture that indicates some kind of sexual interest rather than a purely altruistic gesture like, hey, I wanted to get this for you, here you go. So a lot of participants felt really uncomfortable in situations like that, so they might avoid it entirely, or it sort of spins out into various threads very quickly, so I won't really get into that. But those were some of the two main takeaways from the study as to maybe why aces are less likely to drink.
It's funny, Sasha, because as you were talking in the private chat, we learned that 75% of the other people on the screen do not drink. So
we had a little poll to see.
Yeah, we noticed a pattern here that sort of reflects your finding with such a small sample too. So
yeah,
well, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious.
Yes.
Sorry, Megan. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Sasha. Was there a sort of investigation into drinking patterns before they identified as asexual, or?
Yeah, so qualitatively, it was easier to do that. The quantitative stuff, without getting too bogged down in the details, that was trickier to do just because we use data from NatSal, which is the National Survey of Sexual Attitudes and Lifestyle, and also the Torre Better Sexual Health Survey in Northern Ireland. So participants who were coded as asexual, they indicated that they had never experienced sexual attraction. And that was the way we coded our asexual participants. And so already that's kind of a problem because we know asexuality is a much broader definition, but we were limited based on our materials. So based on that, we couldn't really do sort of a pre-post investigation because we wouldn't know who would have ID'd otherwise versus sort of IDing as or indicating that they were ace, if that makes sense.
No.
My understanding
that makes sense. Yeah.
My understanding is with the NatSal 4, that's going to change.
Yes.
It has been a long long discussion, though. I have to say, I think the people involved have been very open to it. But my understanding is with the Natural four is that there's going to be a lot more ability to indicate different kinds of asexual will not just, yeah, it will be a little bit more diverse than it has been. I think it's been a real problem. It's the desire to get a succinct population and to be able to actually say, because the real question they've been trying to ask since Natsal 1 is, do we have a coherent population of somewhere between 1 and 3?
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, that's the question they wanted to answer. Everything else has been secondary to that. And I think it's now about getting them to move beyond that into other areas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
I did want to interject about the general question of what are the main findings of recent research. There is one particular article that I recommend to people who are not necessarily in academia that just summarizes everything up until 2017, which is fairly recent. I know there's been a lot of development since then, but it's by Jones, Hayter, and Jomeen, it looks like, and it's called Understanding Asexual Identity as a Means to Facilitate Culturally Competent Care, a Systemic Literature Review. So this is the article I send to people outside of academia and tell them, give this to your therapist. There's been a lot of discussion today about like cultural competency of asexuality in therapy and that being a big problem. And that article is just like a review of the literature up to that point. And so it's a really good way to catch up with what's been done in the social sciences. It's very much from a psychology clinical perspective, but it might be helpful if you just want a general idea of what has research found so far. I mean, the big problem is that the community is far ahead of academia on developing concepts of asexuality, asexual communities, aromanticism, and I think that's why I'm so dedicated to like facilitating more cooperation between scholars and activists in the community. But you know, there's also a lot of really great, like I said, up and coming scholars, early career scholars, PhD candidates, and I think anyone who's in a position of being a faculty member, please like be very nice to graduate students. They're going through it. I mean, they're going through it always, but especially now, it's really hard. And so I'm speaking as a faculty member, I feel a really strong sense of responsibility to like foster feminist mentorship relationships with graduate students and support their work, promote their work in any way that we can.
Yeah, talking about that actually, the article that you mentioned, a couple of people in the chat have asked the name of it again. So if you could either pop it in the comments or the private chat, and then
yeah, I could even screen share it if they want, just so they know what it looks. Would we want that, a screen share?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can. The article is called. Let's see, share. Understanding Asexual Identity as a Means to Facilitate Culturally Competent Care, a Systemic Literature Review. So I don't know, maybe you can tweet at me and I can get you the PDF. I don't know if it's paywalled, but it's just a really nice summary of what had been done so far. A lot of Lori Brado's work appears here, so they have kind of a table of different studies. Yeah, give this to your therapist, seriously.
Perfect. Yeah, so
hopefully
definitely look that up if you're interested. Thanks for that. I think I was about to post it in the chat and then someone did it for me, so
perfect.
Yeah, before we move on, anyone else got any findings they particularly want to talk about?
Well, if anyone is interested in, sort of the reclamation of literature, I always point them to an article written by Megan Arkenberg. The title is incredibly long, but it's an Arthuriana, and it's about Galahad as an asexual character and what reading him as an asexual character does for the narrative, and what that means. It's a really interesting read. So if you're interested in that, that would be a good place to start.
I also can't recommend enough Percy Bylo's new book, Asexual Erotics. It's behind me, I think. Yeah, this one. I loved it. And as a social scientist, like, it's not a social science book, but it's such a great theoretical foundation. And it's the first like solo authored feminist queer analysis of asexuality as a book. And I loved it. It's so good.
Cool. Thank you very much. Now I need to find another question. Do you know of any ACE research podcasts, social media, etc., aside from stuff in mediums like journal articles? It's fair enough if you don't.
For some reason, they don't work. There was an asexuality disc mail, which at one point I agreed to take on for a little while, just because nobody else was doing it, and I realized that nobody else was doing it because nobody was actually. I think it might change. I think the problem at the moment, and is something, Megan, is that a lot of the people who have done research in asexual studies are actually have been supervised by people outside of the field, and I think we haven't reached that kind of like critical mass of I'm just beginning to supervise people, and I think once we have that critical mass, that which I really because then you'll see the connections start to build between people, and then I suspect things like a proper research podcast will work. But I just think that's just beginning to come now, and it for a long time it did feel a bit like people were plowing lonely furrows on their own in departments with supervisors who were kind of being benevolent but didn't really understand the work. I know that was the case in my case, and it's now beginning to change. And as that changes, hopefully what we'll have is a more established research network. There were a couple of attempts to try it. I think Mark Carrigan tried it about 5-6 years ago. And Mark's a really, really good guy, but he said he just got tired of trying to get people engaged with, tell me about your research and I'll put it up online. And he was offering to do pretty much all of it. And it just didn't really happen. Hopefully with time, that may change.
There's a
Sorry,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say I do know of a Facebook group called Asexual Research, but I don't know how active it is. That's all I had to say. Keith?
I was just going to say there are a lot of podcasts and blog posts sort of doing what I'm doing and arguing that a character is asexual or a character is aromantic, but they're not necessarily doing it from as critical a position as I am. And so, I get accused of doing headcanon regularly. I have colleagues in my department that say that when they think I'm not listening. But anytime someone says that, hey, this character is asexual or this character is aromantic, my advice to you is don't just write it off as headcanon. Examine their argument. Are they making a critical argument? Because if they're making a critical analysis of this character, they're doing research. It may not be on the academic level necessarily, so it may just be a podcast or it may just be a blog post or a YouTube video, but they're out there and they make some very interesting points. So I try not to discount people who are in this sort of alt-ac sphere where they're not necessarily a part of academic publishing or the traditional academic publishing, but they're still doing critical work on some level. There's value in that. So don't discount that automatically as, it's just someone, a fan headcanoning a character. There are those that do that, but I think there's also a significant number of people that are doing a critical analysis of it.
Perfect. We are running quite close to the end of time. I just wanted to get a couple of quick questions in if we can. So someone wanted to ask, how can someone who's not involved in academia help in research?
Actually, do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah.
My experience of getting into academia was basically, I was previously a music major. I was training as a classical singer, and I was also studying psychology. And one day in class, I had to read a paper by Dr. Lori Brotto, and I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever read. I literally emailed Dr. Brotto and said, "Hey, this is so cool. Can I help in your lab?" And to my shock, she said, "Yeah, sure. Let's talk." And that was sort of the beginning of the end, in a sense. So sometimes just reaching out to the researchers that you really are, following, and the work that you're really interested in, that can be a huge starting point. But it is also a good idea to have some kind of a foundation in research methods, so you can understand what research actually is and how to do it in a way that's sort of theoretically sound, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Anyone else got any suggestions?
I see the question again. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand the question, because I'm one of these people in academia who has such blinders on what's happening outside of academia. Like, that's been my whole career is academia. So I don't know if they're asking, like, how to get involved in research that's not happening in academia, or if they're asking how to get into academia. Like, those are two different questions.
Yeah, maybe we can move on to another question, and then if someone is interested in pursuing that further, I'm sure all of you would be welcome to ask some questions outside of this.
Well, I would say before we move on that even if you're not in an academic institution, if you're participating in research, even if you're just conducting it on you're participating in academic discourse. Academic discourse is not limited to just professors sitting in a stuffy office with a bunch of books in there. Academia exists in all sectors of society, and you, just by virtue of being in this panel and posing questions, you're participating in academia. Like you're part of you're one of us. So don't discount yourself. You are. You're important.
Yeah, and someone did mention in the chat to take the ACE census, which
yes,
I do as well.
And the other thing I would say is that the way it works with community building, with research, with asexual studies is not different from gay and lesbian studies. It's not different from trans studies. Most of this is just speaking as a social movement theorist. It's not that the research identifies something and then people start claiming it. It's the other way around. The research is generated from what people have already done, and that goes right back. You go into the 19th century and you go back to the beginnings of sexology, and actually activists were there 10 years before researchers. You were always there. Megan's point is absolutely right. You were always ahead of us. You were always telling us things that we need to hear. I have people that within the community that I show my writing to, and they tell me, no, that's wrong. That's already out of date. And that's really, really important. That's a really significant part, because researchers, to some extent, or certainly within the social sciences, what we're doing is we're making something acceptable to a particular kind of audience. That's what we do. But the research itself is really only generated from what we see, hear, observe, and measure from communities. So the communities are always they're always the place where research is always happening. People in communities are always making that research happen. It's not us, really.
Absolutely. I will also say, if you're someone who's trying to research on your own and learn more and absorb more of what's already been researched and written, institutional paywalls are a huge problem that we're all aware of. If you don't already know, emailing the author is a great way to just get a free copy of that article. If there's something that's paywalled and you can't get to it, the author will be happy to give it to you for free. There's also a Facebook group called Ask for PDFs from People with Institutional Access. Ask for PDFs from People with Institutional Access. It has 77,000 members, and people all the time are like, hey, I'm looking for this article, and someone will give it to you.
Cool. Thank you very much. We're about at time, so we're going to start wrapping up. Thank you all for coming to the panel, the audience and the panelists. I think this is a very interesting discussion, and I'm sure all of you would be. We could talk about this for ages. There's plenty to talk about next research. But yeah, and also a massive thanks to moderator Kuhu, who has been helping behind the scenes to make this all happen. But yeah, the next thing that's happening in today is the last kind of streamed to YouTube bit, which is the closing session with Yasmin Benoit and David J, and that's happening in 10 minutes at 6 o'clock UK time. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope the rest of your day goes wonderfully. This is the end.
This has been so much fun. Thank you so much for having us and everyone who's put work in making this possible. It's a great conference.
It is. Megan, I'd really love to talk more about the research you're doing at some point. I'll send you an email. And Derrick, I may send you an email anyway, because I have some books I want. Sorry, Keith, my glasses are. I have some texts from the 1930s I was going to mention to you.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
There is a paper coming out from someone looking at Kenneth Williams and Joe Orton and Kenneth Halliwell. It's been promised for about a year, and they are talking about reading Orton as allosexual, Halliwell as demisexual, and Williams as some combination of aromantic,